For a lot of people, this is what comes to mind when they think about university. Aesthetic studying, fun parties, meeting new people, dorm life, when in reality, it is not all of that all the time. Romanticizing university can make it more enjoyable, but it can also paint this really idealistic image. I also want to preface this video by saying that I'm not trying to point out like all the negative things about university. Rather, I just want to validate how people might feel. I know at times I have felt a lot of these things, and talking about it does help and kind of breaking down those barriers. So let's get into the reality of university. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on, and maybe the most obvious thing, is the physical toll that university can take on your body. I know for me during first year, I was perpetually sick. I always had a cold, and then I even got strep throat during first year as well. And I thought I was taking care of my body, but I definitely was not. I was staying up till like 2, 3 a.m. and then going to class early the next morning, and then I would come back to my dorm and I would go to sleep and just like nap midday. It was a really weird routine. It was not healthy. Having a constant source of stress is not good for us. Lack of sleep is also correlated with higher stress levels, so that stress plus the combination with the lack of sleep is a bad situation. So the next thing I'm going to discuss is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is when you feel like you're a fraud, or you have kind of feelings of self-doubt regarding your accomplishments. I feel like imposter syndrome is something that I felt throughout university, but I didn't really have a label for it. I can remember when I did well on a test sometimes and I would get it back and think, oh, I just got lucky, or oh, the test was easy, the prof made it too easy. And I wouldn't acknowledge my intelligence. I would self-doubt and maybe think that I didn't deserve that, or that I just got lucky and it wasn't because of my skill or the effort that I put in. I also remember during first year, I felt that feeling of being a fraud, especially when I was sitting in a lecture hall and people would be asking questions to the professor and I did not even understand the questions they were asking. I also felt like I could not ask questions because I couldn't even form a smart enough sounding question, and essentially I just felt like I didn't belong and that everyone around me, you know, was smarter than me and knew more than me. And I think this feeling of imposter syndrome can kind of link to feeling lonely as well, because you feel like you don't belong and you're that one person out, and that can be really isolating. So next I wanted to touch on grades, because grades are obviously a big part of university and school in general. In first and second year, I feel like I actually didn't have too much anxiety over my grades. I kind of accepted that they were probably gonna lower from high school, and I kind of was just going with the flow. It wasn't until about like third and even fourth year that I actually got super anxious about my grades, and I think that is because I started to let them define my worth. And basically I set up super unrealistic expectations that were basically impossible to meet, and when I didn't meet those, I felt like absolute shit. And even though I would tell myself like, okay, my grades do not define my worth, they don't define my intelligence, they don't define me, telling yourself that and actually believing it are two very different things. And even though I tried to tell myself that, I feel like I was having a hard time believing it just because I ingrained this idea into my head. It is so hard to actually implement that and allow yourself to be okay with your grade. So the next point actually came from my sister, because I wanted to get some other people's perspectives as well and see kind of what their hardest parts about university were. And what she said was one of the hardest parts about university was the fact that there is never ending work and there's always something to do. I totally agree with this. There's not really a full-on break until the end of term, so Christmas break, and even if you do have little breaks in between, it can feel like there's always something that you can make better. There's always studying that you can do. It is kind of endless with the readings, the discussion posts, working on projects, assignments, studying for that midterm. Something also related to this is with all these classes and all these things to do, you often don't feel like you can put your whole self into one thing even if you really want to. And I feel like that can sometimes also get frustrating, because even if you are interested in all the courses, all the material that you are doing, you don't have time to, you know, put 100% into each thing or go that extra mile. The next big thing with university that does not always go well is living alone. Oftentimes, university is the first situation where you're living alone. I know that's not the case for everyone, but it is the case for a lot of people, and it was the case for me. First year, I lived in the first year dorms, and I thought living in the dorms was gonna be a blast. You know, I thought it was gonna be so fun. I was gonna become best friends with everyone on my floor. It was gonna be, you know, time of my life. And I'm not gonna lie, I was completely thrown off when I realized I'm not gonna probably become friends with any of these people. And honestly, right now, I don't talk to anyone who was on my floor. I think I had this huge expectation that by living in dorms, I'm automatically gonna make some best friends, and that was not the case. I think a lot of times people underestimate how lonely living in a dorm can feel, especially when you don't have a roommate. I had someone in my class, I think last year, and they were talking about how they lived in the first year dorm, and a couple months in, they ended up having to move out and they moved back in with their family. In that situation, they lived close enough to the campus where they could commute in about like an hour and a half, I think, and they decided they would rather do the commute rather than live in the dorms because they needed that social support. Not everyone has the ability to just move back home, obviously. So living in the dorms can be very isolating. I mean, essentially you are living in a little box. I experienced very competing feelings where on the one side I wanted to go out a lot of the time and meet people, make friends, and on the other side I was just comfortable sitting in my dorm and kind of didn't want to leave. And putting those two together, it made me feel really lonely. Along with living alone, that means you have to juggle everything on your own now, even if it's simple things like doing the laundry, buying food, cleaning, that sort of stuff. Also, when I live with my family, obviously, even if I'm not speaking to them, there's people around. If I'm just sitting, you know, studying, reading, there's kind of always someone around. And I think that's something that you don't think you're gonna miss, and then suddenly you're completely alone and you just miss the company. That lack of social support, or even the perceived lack of social support, can impact not only your mental health but also your physical health, because a lot of studies have found that social support can actually boost your immune system, you know, reduce your blood pressure during stressful times. So not having that social support can really impact your well-being. So the next thing that I want to talk about is community. Even though you can find great communities at university, you do have to put yourself out there and you kind of have to make them happen. And what I mean by this is in high school and even in elementary school, your class is where you met a lot of your friends. You spent the whole year with the exact same classmates. There were also a lot of organized activities, and automatically those people became part of your community. But in university, and even as you adult and kind of come out of high school, that becomes so much harder. So for instance, in university, you don't have the same people in your lectures. So every lecture, you're getting a different group of people essentially. That can make it harder to make friends and foster a sense of community. And of course, you can join, you know, sports teams, Greek life, clubs, but for people who don't enjoy naturally putting themselves out there, and I'm definitely one of those people, then finding your community and feeling a part of one does become a lot harder during university. So now let's talk about freedom, the thing everyone seems to want, but once you get it, that's when things can go a little crazy. So this can come with living alone, or even just with going to university, even if you are still living with your family. A lot of the times you suddenly have a lot more freedom, and this can be dangerous. So suddenly you're making all of your own decisions and you are responsible for getting everything done. These daily decisions can maybe seem mundane and not that big a deal, but it can be a lot when you're the one deciding essentially how you're gonna live your life. So you decide if you're gonna go to class today, you decide if you're gonna lie in bed and watch Netflix instead, or if you're gonna go study at the library. You know, everything is up to you now, and nobody's really gonna hound you to do a certain thing. You know, your parents often aren't going to be responsible for that anymore, as well as your teachers often in university are not going to follow up if you were absent. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on is how hard university is financially. And I think this comes as no surprise to anyone. University is freaking expensive, and it's not only the tuition and the classes, it's also, for instance, the textbooks. I saw a post on Instagram about my university, and it said that on average, people spend $1,200 a year on textbooks, especially in first year when you can't even buy secondhand books because the prof decides that they're making a new edition every year, or you need it as a requirement and you can't find it online. There's also housing and transit, which is a completely different story. Housing on my campus is extremely expensive. Housing in Vancouver is expensive in general, but the campus is also expensive, no exception to that. And I'm sure it is everywhere. And if you're not going to live on campus, that means you're transiting, but transiting also costs a lot of money. If you're driving, gas, car, insurance, parking spots. Some people can't even get parking spots. We have a wait list at my school for parking spots. So, you know, there's all these little things that sometimes you don't think about, but they can add a lot of stress. It's also important to acknowledge that a lot of people have to work during university and have to pay for university themselves. And while I've had some part-time jobs while I have been at university, I cannot directly speak to having to completely support myself, and I can't really imagine how tough that would be. They definitely would add immense amounts of stress, you know, trying to support yourself while also trying to put your best foot forward academically. Also, I wanted to quickly say that a lot of people say first year is the worst time and it'll get better, you know, in second, third, fourth year. So don't feel bad if you're also struggling in fourth year still, because that was me. And I feel like less people talk about it, but it is totally normal as well. So those were all of the points that I had for today, and I just want to say that while university can be a great time, it can also be a really stressful time. Just don't be afraid to reach out for some support if you do need it. If you're struggling, know that you're not the only one who is, and know it also will get better. So that's it for today's video, and I will see you next time.